Hi, this is Dave Cuthbertson. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of AssetGen. I'm here to take you through in this video how we can use AssetGen to document and manage cabling infrastructure. The focus of AssetGen is to do the physical infrastructure, as you can see on the right hand side, and this allows us to plan, build, operate and manage multi-site, multi-room cabling. There's many different types of physical environments such as data centers and offices, but what we aim to do is to cover all the patching, cross-connects, blown fiber, local area, modular systems, and also produce capacity information as to how much cabling infrastructure is available as a resource. And one of the key things with AssetGen is the ability to produce Visio diagrams that also explain dependencies and connectivity of the cabling infrastructure. To document connectivity, we have to do inventory, and so the scope will be quite important. But most customers often start with data centers where there's a lot of complexity and then move out to equipment rooms and offices and maybe even branch networks. AssetGen is flexible enough to cover all those different types of infrastructures. The components that make up your infrastructure, both active and passive, are sometimes simple like a switch or a patch panel, or more complex like chassis devices such as blade servers, modular cabling systems, optical distribution frames. So we have to have the flexibility within AssetGen to be able to cope with all types of components. And this is where there's a major difference between spreadsheets, which actually have great difficulty being reconfigured to cope with new devices and new technologies. We may want a high-level view, cabling architecture views to understand the capacity between rooms and buildings, but we also want to understand the physical positions of all the components, and this is why we integrate AssetGen with Visio to automatically produce rack layouts on a very large scale, but also to update floor plans where there's physical locations, which could be data outlets, wireless access points, digital signage. In this case we've got cameras, but they're all part of the connectivity of the environment. And what we aim to do with AssetGen is to then give you the capability that if you want, you can have other types of connectivity, such as power, in the same system, because the device often has both data and power connectivity, which all have to be managed. There may be separate teams involved, but we also have the ability to separate out outputs to suit people who do all the M&E and power, as opposed to people doing the fiber or the copper cabling. The end result is what you see there on the right hand side, is the ability to get a connection path out of any device, which could be either in a planned state or could actually be there physically active, where we have the detail that enables us to trace a particular port on a particular card to the endpoint and through the infrastructure to either plan, decommission, fault find. It all depends. Why not just use the same data for all of it? Documenting connectivity is not easy, and the reason it's not easy, and it takes up a lot of resource and time and cost, is that if you don't trust your documentation, you have to go and do site surveys. But for most people, they use spreadsheets because it's very flexible and can handle different technology types. The only trouble is we need hundreds of them, maybe a couple per building of inventory and connectivity, maybe a different spreadsheet for fiber because it maybe has a different structure to copper. But with AssetGen, one database will replace thousands of spreadsheets, as well as create all the reports and diagrams that help explain things that you can't necessarily do in a spreadsheet. Maintaining multiple spreadsheets, checking they're correct, making sure they're consistent is not simple because it's very time consuming, very manual, and very prone to error. And so with AssetGen we reduce the numbers of manual steps and inconsistencies because our database removes a lot of the duplication that's necessary. So there's a real efficiency saving here. Because from the same data we also produce diagrams, we get an increased amount of efficiency because it saves you having to draw things to try and understand them, particularly where there's diverse routes and maybe different options available. And the aim is to allow local understanding to be brought back to centralized teams of planners, but also so they can communicate with contractors, service providers and others who are all involved in the planning, build and operation of any large infrastructure. The aim is never to do a site survey or visit because your documentation has all the information you need. So you can centrally plan and manage not just another building, but another country, without necessarily having to go there or be familiar with the environment. So let's show you how that's done. This is the AssetGen Connect user interface, and on the left hand side we have a hierarchy which can be flexible with multiple levels, covering buildings, cabinets, equipments and connections. And what I've just described there is the 4 spreadsheets you would use to load our system from existing information sets. So no matter how many spreadsheets that you have, in practice from a data perspective, we only really need 4 spreadsheets to actually load our system for any size of environment. If I want the detail of what a port is connected to, I click on it and do a port trace, and it shows me that this port is connected to a SAN switch. This is a direct connection with a patch, a color and a cable ID. If I click on the Ethernet port on the left hand side, I see that the path is longer. There's a couple of intermediate patch panels, and from our perspective, any device that you have, servers, switches, power strips, this format will work for them, and it can extend out to cover quite long connectivity between things. To bring this out as an instruction to either install or decommission, we have what we call a quick report in our system, which will produce the textual report that gives you an understanding of where you need to go on the left hand side, which cabinets in which rooms, the equipments, the ports, and then any other local information that you have. Could be cable colors, could be cable IDs, it's up to you. And if you put in information about length, it will actually then total up the length for you. And that's one type of output, and this is a detailed path for decommission, installation, maybe even just fault finding, just verification. If I go up a level to the actual server itself, we can do a port trace on the whole device on this tab on the right hand side, and this will show us all the endpoints so we can get a consolidated view of that server and what it's connected to. And I can bring out an equivalent report giving a breakdown of every single connection on that server, all the cabinets you need to have access to install or decommission it, and the types of connections and also the cable IDs. A lot of customers also create different types of instructions because there may be different teams doing copper or fiber, and also they may want to try and generate cable labels from the same data. So we also give the ability here to have 3 different types of spreadsheet outputs: a vertical perspective, very much like what you saw there on that textual display, but you can also have a horizontal view where you can read from the left to the right. So here's the horizontal summary view where you can read from the left the equipment name and the connections, and then we can follow through the path, and we can see that the first line there is just a single direct connection to a SAN switch, which is what we saw before, whereas the second line we actually have multiple paths going between various patch panels to terminate in a switch. The option is up to you yourself as to which formats, horizontal or vertical, you would like, but this format's very easy to write some Excel formulas to then create all the cable labels and print them off locally on the label printer. Convenience is everything, especially if you have quite a lot of instructions to do. So what we've seen there is we can show a device and all of its connectivity. The end connections that you see here, these are all hyperlinked. So if I click on switch number 5, it shows switch number 5 on the left hand side. I can do a port trace of that switch and see all the endpoints, exactly the same as I did with the server, and I can bring this out as a full breakdown of all connections on that switch if we wish to replace it, or we wish to consolidate maybe to core switches or fabric switches. But what I have here is I have 5 pages worth of every single connection and all the cabinets, so I can work out the most efficient way to do a replacement exercise, or if something's gone faulty, where we need to go to actually replace things. The key thing there is to keep it as simple and as easy as possible. I'll go back to the server that we were on, and what I'll now do is I'll now create a Visio diagram of how this server is connected. And so the step first of all is to do a right click on the server, and this will then show that we have the option to do a network topology drawing. This user interface allows us to show where we're starting from on the left. On the right hand side, how far do we want to go? Just stay within Birmingham. On the far right, what type of equipment would you like to have on the diagram? And so I'll include here, let's see the patch panels that the server connects into, and let's also see the switches as well. So we'll see these 3 components on our Visio diagram. I then press draw. So here's a Visio diagram that we've just produced from our system showing the connectivity. I'll probably want to rearrange it to make it a little bit more understandable. So what I'll do is I'll just take this switch down here and the patch panel that goes with it. I'll take this switch down there and I'll move this patch panel across, and then I'll just lay them out to make it a bit more easier to understand. And what we can see there is the server is connected. These are the ports on the patch panels that we're going to actually get to those switches. We've also embedded information within the diagram that shows for that server all of the configuration details that we had within the system, and we've also embedded on the actual links the port names, and you might have other things, cable IDs, IP addresses and such like. You didn't have to do this in any special way. It was just one of the outputs of the system, and there's many other different ways. You might like to have a larger type of network diagram, and so here is a bigger diagram where we used a different selection criteria, where we just said show me core switches, edge switches, and show me the connectivity between them. You'll notice there's no patch panels, because when I generated the diagram I decided actually it was too much detail, so you have a choice as to the amount of information that you want to have. Going back to our server, we've seen here how we can have all the connectivity information about the server and all the cabling that goes with this. AssetGen also provides various types of exports into spreadsheet form, so you can always create your own reports and your own summaries outside of some of the standard reports that we have. One particularly useful one here is called port utilization. If I click on this, and this will create a spreadsheet where we can then summarize any type of connection type, along with hierarchy, with buildings and with equipments, and we can always repeat these by saving them as a template. So here's a number of templates. I'm going to just do one called backbone fiber capacity, load this up, and you can see it's holding the fiber capacity. Do run, and now it's generated a spreadsheet that shows us all the different patch panels, all the different types of fiber connections, and if I scroll to the right hand side, how many of the connections are actually in use, how many are reserved, how many are undocumented, how many are faulty. I didn't have to actually create this specially. This is just yet again another report that a lot of people would create a spreadsheet for, but it's one of the key things when we're trying to manage connectivity is we do need a consolidated view to make sure we know where we have spare capacity for planning changes within our environment. I hope that gives you an understanding of AssetGen Connect and how it can help you document and manage cabling infrastructures. Look at your current position, how many diagrams, spreadsheets, gaps, inconsistencies you have that could be solved by having a multi-user system that also has a very flexible database structure and gives obviously a high degree of productivity compared to manual methods. Contact us. An introduction, an online demo is often a good way to start with. There is a time-limited evaluation version that you can try out, and we can walk you through that. But normally we'll help talk and discuss an implementation plan and a proposal so you can see the sorts of approaches that are available, particularly maybe using your own data. There's lots of other organizations that have gone through the same process, and hopefully you'll find that AssetGen Connect will help you document and manage your cabling as well.